A simple act of kindness got her fired, but the man she helped came back 30 minutes later and changed her life forever. The Ohio sky is still wrapped in pale indigo as the first flickers of light stretch across the horizon. Streetlights flicker against the frost-bitten sidewalks, casting a sleepy glow over a town just beginning to stir. Somewhere in the silence, a coffee maker sputters to life. Inside a modest apartment, the kitchen is dim, cluttered with reminders of survival. A half-empty bottle of prescription pills sits next to a stack of unopened mail. One envelope, worn and creased, reads final notice in harsh red ink. A small calendar on the fridge is filled with scribbled notes. Mom's doctor 10 a.m., rent due, double shift, Friday. Before we begin, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more life-changing stories like this one. Enjoy the story. Maria Thompson moves through the space like someone who's learned to exist in tight margins. She rubs warmth into her hands and wraps her fingers around a chipped mug, steam curling into her face. She takes a sip, too bitter, and exhales slowly, eyes lingering on her sleeping mother in the adjacent room. Oxygen machine humming, blanket up to her chin. Peaceful for now. It's not quite 6 a.m., but Maria's already dressed, layers of thermals and a navy blue jacket with a faded Dawson's gas and go patch on the sleeve. Her boots are worn, laces frayed, soles betraying the miles she walks each day. She grabs her keys from a bowl, checks the heater one last time, and locks the door behind her with a soft click. The gas station squats at the edge of town, a relic from the 80s. The neon open sign hums lazily in the window, casting a pinkish glow on frost-covered pavement. Maria arrives before the sun does. She unlocks the glass door, steps into the stale warmth, and flips on the lights one section at a time. The station is quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that echoes. She begins her routine, restocking gum packs and windshield wipes, wiping down the counters, and putting on the old coffee pot that leaks when it gets too full. Her movements are practiced, mechanical, but every now and then, her eyes drift toward the wall clock like it's something she's racing against. At the front counter, a small radio crackles with morning news. Local politics. A high school football score. The same nonsense every day. Maria hums along to an old song playing faintly, something her mom used to sing when folding laundry. She closes her eyes for just a moment, soaking in the memory. The bell above the door jingles. First customer. It's a farmer from the outskirts. He grunts a greeting, grabs coffee and jerky, and pays in cash. Maria offers a smile, genuine despite the hour. You staying warm out there? Trying to, he mutters, already on his way out. And so the morning unfolds, slow and steady. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing past the windows like a ghost. Maria steps out with a crate of windshield washer fluid, her breath curling into the air. She stocks pump 3 with cold fingers, eyes watering from the wind. Back inside, the station is warming up with early risers and tired truckers. Maria handles them all the same, smiles, small talk, no complaints. But behind her kindness, there's something quieter. A fatigue she doesn't speak of. A weight she's carried so long it feels like part of her. Behind the counter, tucked just out of sight, is a lunchbox with a peanut butter sandwich. Next to it, a sticky note. Love you, Mom. Come home safe. She reads it more than once. Lunchtime brings a lull. Maria sits on a plastic stool behind the counter, eating slowly, chewing with thought. She glances at the security monitor above the door, one screen per pump. All quiet. She pulls out her phone and opens the health portal, her mom's latest lab results. She doesn't understand all the jargon, but one word keeps popping up, decline. Her thumb hovers, then moves to her banking app. Balance, $42.18. Rent is $620. She swallows hard and tucks the phone away before the tears can rise. The bell jingles again. Another customer. Maria straightens, mask back on. Afternoon drags. Eddie, the manager, storms in around 3 o'clock like he's on a mission from corporate hell. He doesn't say hello. He never does. You didn't restock the lottery slips, he snaps. Maria moves to do it without a word. And don't forget the ice machine's acting up. We need a maintenance call. She nods. I'll handle it. Also, he says, turning, you clocked in 3 minutes early this morning. She blinks. Yeah, I just wanted to get the coffee going before. Just don't do it again. It messes with payroll. He walks away. Maria's smile falters, but she lets it fade only after he's gone. Outside, the sun finally gives up its weak fight and begins to sink. Shadows stretch across the concrete as another car pulls in. An older Lincoln, barely hanging on, engine rattling like a dry cough. Maria watches as the driver steps out. There's something about the way he moves. Hesitant, cautious. His coat is too thin for the cold, and he carries himself like someone unfamiliar with asking for help. Maria watches. He approaches the pump, swipes a card. Waits. Swipes again. Nothing. She sees the way his jaw tightens, the way his shoulders slump. She knows that look. She's worn it herself. Without thinking, she steps outside. You all right? She asks, voice kind but distant, like not to spook him. He hesitates. Just a card issue. I'll figure it out. She nods slowly. If you're heading far, $20 might help. He looks at her, surprised. Suspicious. I'll cover it, she says. No big deal. He doesn't know what to say. Just pay it forward someday, she adds, already walking away. Back inside, she authorizes the pump. Watches him fill up. Watches him drive away. Then she exhales. A long, shaky breath. Kindness doesn't cost much. But in her world, it always comes with a price. And she's about to find out just how steep that price is. The wind howled a little louder now, like it knew something Maria didn't. Inside the gas station, the overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the floor. Maria stood behind the counter, staring out through the window where the Lincoln had just disappeared down the highway. The car was old, but it had made it. That was enough. She told herself it was enough. She reached for her coffee. Cold. Just like the air that had followed her in. She didn't mind. There were worse things than the cold. The doors swung open with a sharp jingle. It wasn't another customer. It was Eddie. He was holding a printout in one hand, his expression carved out of stone. Maria didn't move. Didn't need to. She knew that look. She knew when something small had become something big in someone else's eyes. Eddie slapped the receipt on the counter between them. What the hell is this? She glanced down. Pump 3. $20. Her ID number. The timestamp. Her pulse flickered. That man out there, he didn't pay, did he? Eddie's voice was sharp, louder than it needed to be in a half-empty store. I paid for it, she replied softly. With your employee card? He barked a short, humorless laugh. Jesus, Maria. That's not what it's for. He couldn't afford gas, she said, trying to stay calm. I covered it. It won't affect the register. It affects the audit, he snapped. It affects inventory. It affects policy. You don't just give away product. You know that. I didn't give it away, she said, finally standing straighter. I paid for it. Out of my paycheck if I have to. Doesn't matter, he said. It's unauthorized. It's liability. It's corporate. The words hit her like falling bricks. She'd heard them before, in different tones, from different mouths. Policy. Liability. Corporate. The holy trinity of excuses used to push people like her aside. I've worked here for 3 years, she said, voice steadier now. Never been late. Never missed a shift. And I get fired over a $20 kindness? Eddie looked uncomfortable for the first time, but not remorseful. Never remorseful. I'm sorry, Maria, he muttered. But I can't keep you on. She stared at him. There were so many things she wanted to say. So many things she wanted to throw. But instead, she just reached down, unpinned her name tag, and set it on the counter beside the receipt. She walked out into the biting air without another word. The sky was gray now, bruised with clouds. Her boots crunched against gravel as she crossed the parking lot. The wind tugged at her coat, at her spirit, at everything she had left. She sat down hard on the curb beside the dumpster, her breath ragged. She lit a cigarette, one of the ones she'd told herself she was quitting, and let the smoke sit in her lungs a little too long before exhaling. Her hands trembled. Her world was already a tightrope. No safety net. No fallback. And now, with one act of kindness, she'd been pushed off the edge. How do you explain that to your mother? How do you pay for insulin with good intentions? How do you keep smiling when the universe just told you kindness is a punishable offense? The wind whipped around her again, bitter and relentless. Then, a sound, soft at first. Tires crunching gravel. A car pulling back in. Maria didn't look up right away. She figured it was someone coming to fuel up. Maybe someone who'd complained the bathroom was locked again. She didn't care. But the engine shut off. The door opened. Footsteps approached. Maria? She looked up slowly, squinting through smoke and wind and disbelief. It was him. The man from the Lincoln. Only he didn't look the same. Gone was the dusty coat and slouched shoulders. He wore a dark tailored blazer now, clean lines and quiet wealth. His shoes were polished. His eyes clearer. Focused. She stood slowly, still stunned. You came back. I did, he said gently. Because I wasn't honest with you. Maria blinked, guarded now. My name is David Langston, he continued. I run a company called Langston Systems. Humanitarian logistics. Disaster response. Resource mapping. She didn't understand. Not yet. This morning, he said, gesturing toward the pumps behind them. I was conducting an exercise. Something I've been doing in various towns. Stripping away the status, the money, the identity. Trying to see who notices someone when they're not someone. Who helps when there's nothing to gain. And she started, then stopped. You saw me, he said. You helped me. No hesitation. No judgment. Maria felt her knees weaken. Are you saying you were pretending? I needed to know what kindness looks like when no one's watching, he said. And you showed me. She was silent for a long moment. I got fired for that. I know, he said. And I'm here to change that. She frowned, heart thudding. What do you mean? I want to offer you a job, he said. With my company. Maria stared at him. Why? Because people like you should never be punished for having a good heart, David said. You understood something the world forgets too easily, that compassion matters. I don't want you working behind a counter anymore. I want you out there, making decisions, helping people. For real. She couldn't breathe. I don't have a degree. I've never worked in an office. I don't care about resumes, he said, cutting her off gently. I care about character. You've already passed the hardest test. She blinked, eyes glassy. What kind of job? Community outreach, he said. Building bridges. Identifying needs. Creating solutions. You've lived it, Maria. That's what we need. She looked down at her hands. Oil-stained. Rough. Strong. Full benefits. Salary, he added. And your mother's prescriptions, covered. Maria didn't cry, not right away. But something broke open inside her. A tension she'd been carrying for years suddenly lifted, like ice cracking on a lake surface. She nodded, just once. Okay, she whispered. David smiled. Let's go change some lives. And for the first time in a long time, Maria Thompson believed she could. The world had always been heavy on Maria's shoulders. But that afternoon, as she sat across from David Langston in a quiet cafe just off the highway, it felt like someone had lifted a portion of the weight. Not all of it, but enough for her to breathe again. The tea in front of her had gone cold. She hadn't touched it. She couldn't stop watching David. He spoke with an ease she hadn't encountered before, not the polished sales pitch of someone trying to impress, but the measured voice of a man who had seen things, lived things, and meant every word he said. She was still trying to believe this was real. I don't want you to answer me today, he said gently. I know this is a lot. Just sit with it. Think about what you want. Maria looked down at her hands again, still faintly stained with gasoline and dish soap from the gas station. I'm used to life being about what I can have, not what I want. He tilted his head, watching her carefully. And maybe that's exactly what needs to change. She didn't say anything, but her silence wasn't resistance. It was awe. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Out of habit, yes, but also out of restlessness. The apartment was still quiet. Her mother hadn't stirred yet. Maria walked to the small mirror near the front door and studied her reflection. Tired eyes, messy bun, skin worn thin by sleepless nights and long shifts. But beneath it, something unfamiliar. A spark. The faintest glimmer of possibility. She turned and glanced at the coffee table where a business card lay. Langston Systems. His number written in neat script beneath the logo. She picked it up, turned it over in her fingers, and smiled to herself. An hour later, she was standing in front of a tall building in Columbus, the city pulsing quietly around her. People in suits passed by with purpose. Coffee in hand, phones glued to their ears. She felt underdressed in her cleanest sweater and worn jeans, but she kept her head high. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile and handed her a visitor badge. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened to a wide office floor bathed in morning light. Modern, open, buzzing, but not cold. It was strange. She had expected something more intimidating, but the air here felt intentional. David was waiting at the end of the hallway, leaning casually against a glass wall, a cup of coffee in his hand. You came, he said, smiling. I did, she replied, her voice soft but steady. Good. Come on, let me show you something. He led her through the space, past clusters of desks and teams huddled around maps and boards. Large screens displayed real-time data, storms brewing in one region, supply chains mapped in another. People moved quickly but not frantically. Everyone seemed to know why they were here. "This is what we do," David said. "We listen. We respond. We act fast, but with purpose. Whether it's delivering water to wildfire victims or rebuilding school infrastructure after a flood, we make sure people aren't forgotten." He paused in front of a glass conference room. "This would be your space." Maria blinked. "My." He nodded. "You'll lead a pilot program. Community listening posts. You'll go into small towns, talk to people, build trust, report back. You're not just a voice. We want you to be our ears." She stared at the room. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. "David," she said, turning to him, "I don't have credentials. I don't have a LinkedIn. I've never even stepped inside a space like this." He smiled. "Credentials didn't buy me gas that day. You did." She laughed, the sound unfamiliar in her own throat. Then she walked into the room. Her first week was filled with onboarding meetings, stacks of welcome packets, and team introductions. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in years, Maria wasn't tired from exhaustion. She was tired from learning. She took notes. She asked questions. She stayed late. Her old life hadn't prepared her for boardrooms or briefings, but it had taught her how to listen. And that made all the difference. When she wasn't in the office, she was on the road. Her car was old and grumbled like an angry cat, but it got her from one town to the next. The first stop was a rural library in Marion, Ohio. A dozen folding chairs set up in a circle. Maria stood in front of the group, heart pounding. She introduced herself, awkwardly at first, but her voice found its rhythm as she began to share her story, briefly, just enough to build a bridge. Then she asked, "What do you need here?" And they told her. About broken roads. About underfunded schools. About food insecurity in forgotten neighborhoods. She wrote it all down. Later that night, sitting in a budget motel room, Maria typed up her first report to Langston Systems. She signed it not as a clerk or an employee, but as someone finally being heard. Weeks passed, then months. The apartment was no longer quiet in the same way. Her mother laughed more now. Her prescriptions arrived on time. The fridge was full. Maria's new life had a different rhythm. Early mornings, crosstown drives, community events, small-town potlucks, kids showing her drawings of their dream playgrounds. One afternoon, after returning from a visit to Lima, Ohio, Maria stepped into her office to find a package on her desk. Inside, a framed photograph. Grainy, from a gas station security feed. A woman standing beside pump 3, her back to the camera, authorizing $20 of fuel for a stranger. And beneath it, a brass plate that read, "Kindness is the seed. You made it grow." Tears welled up in her eyes. She stood quietly, pressing a hand to her chest. For so long, Maria had believed the world only noticed you when you made a mistake, when you slipped, when you failed. But now she knew better. Kindness wasn't weakness. It wasn't naive. It was a quiet revolution. One that began with $20, a gas pump, and a woman who chose to see someone. And that, she realized, was more powerful than anything she'd ever imagined. The first storm of fall rolled in without warning. Thunder growled across the sky as Maria stood on the side of a cracked county road in northern Ohio, her boots slick with mud, her phone blinking between 1 bar and 0. Her car had died 3 miles back, and now her only shelter was a rusted bus stop with no roof and graffiti older than her. She tightened her coat, the cold cutting through the seams. But she didn't curse the day. She didn't throw things or cry. She just stood there, eyes closed, face turned toward the wind. It reminded her that she was alive. 3 months ago, she would have been behind a register, watching the rain smear against the glass while the clock dragged toward closing. Now, she was here, soaked, stranded, freezing, but moving forward. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself. The emergency backpack in her trunk had a power bank and flare. She'd packed it after her second field visit, just in case. Now, soaked through, she jogged back toward the stalled car. When she reached it, headlights were coming up the hill. A truck slowed beside her county repair crew. The driver leaned out the window. "Everything all right, ma'am?" It was such a simple question, but something about being called ma'am, about being seen, respected, struck her in a strange place. She nodded. "Yeah, car's being stubborn. I'll be fine." He grinned. "You look like the type who would be. Want to jump?" 15 minutes later, the engine grumbled back to life. As she slid behind the wheel, damp hair clinging to her cheek, Maria realized something. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was who she was becoming. Back at Langston Systems HQ, the atmosphere had shifted. The office buzzed with speculation. Maria noticed it first in David. One day, she finally asked him, "Is something wrong?" David hesitated for the first time since she'd known him. "Nothing I can't handle." Which, in Maria's experience, always meant everything is falling apart. That Friday, she was called into the boardroom. Not by David, by HR. She walked in to find two unfamiliar faces seated beside the company's legal counsel. The tension was immediate. Papers, folders, pins capped tightly on a sterile glass table. "Maria," one of them began, "we appreciate the work you've been doing. There have been significant developments." Her pulse kicked up. Due to restructuring initiatives, some departments are being audited for compliance. This includes outreach. Maria straightened. "Are you saying I'm under review?" "No," the lawyer said carefully. "Your program is." The words hit like a punch to the stomach. "I've submitted reports. Weekly. I've followed every procedure," she said firmly. The first man nodded. "We know. This isn't about you. But the budget used to launch your role came from an emergency operations fund, which is now being scrutinized." She blinked. "So because David fast-tracked the pilot, I'm expendable?" Silence. "We're not making decisions today," they said. "But there's a freeze. On hiring, travel, outreach. Effective immediately." The door closed behind her like the end of a chapter. Maria found David on the rooftop that evening, staring out at the city like it was some massive chessboard he couldn't solve. She walked up beside him. Didn't speak. "Finally," he said, "they think I moved too fast." "Did you?" He turned, the lines in his face deeper than usual. "Does it matter?" "The work was urgent." "It is urgent." "Then tell them that." "I did. They want numbers, not stories." Maria felt something hot build in her chest. "So they want proof. That kindness works." He didn't reply. She took a breath, heart pounding. "Then give it to them." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Maria gathered testimonials from every town she'd visited. Teachers, nurses, elderly residents, single parents. Each one recorded a message, emailed a statement, took a photo with the new food bank or clinic sign behind them. When she presented it all to the executive board, she didn't wear heels or speak in polished jargon. She wore her windbreaker, her boots, her truth. "Maybe the outreach program doesn't look like numbers on a screen," she told them. "Maybe it's not about metrics yet, but I promise you it matters. I was one of those people. I was invisible until someone decided to look. Now I help others do the same." She paused. "If you shut this down, you're not cutting costs. You're cutting hope." The room was silent. David sat across from her, unreadable. Then, finally, a quiet clap. One board member. Then another. David stood. "We move forward," he said. The freeze lifted. Maria's program doubled. She hired 2 new coordinators. And for the first time in her life, Maria didn't just feel needed. She was leading. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled around the downtown sidewalks, Maria visited the old gas station. It looked the same, green paint peeling, flickering sign, dusty windows. A new girl worked the register. She smiled at Maria, but didn't recognize her. Maria bought a coffee and walked out slowly, standing beneath the familiar canopy of Pump 3. She closed her eyes and remembered how cold the wind had been, how heavy the world had felt, and how a simple yes had changed the entire course of her life. She took a deep breath, then whispered to the air, "Thank you." And for the first time in years, the world whispered back, "You're welcome." Maria hadn't meant to become the voice of a movement. It just happened, like water finding cracks in a foundation. Her story had slipped into unexpected places. Quiet at first, then louder. A community blog picked it up. A regional paper followed. By the time a national outlet reached out, she had to sit with David and ask, "Are we ready for this?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and stared out the window. The late fall sky bled orange and purple across the glass. "I think," he said slowly, "the world needs more reminders that people still matter." So they said yes, and the floodgates opened. The story was simple, but it gripped people in a way that algorithms couldn't explain. A woman fired for a random act of kindness, then lifted up by the very person she helped. It sounded like fiction, but it wasn't. Maria gave her first real interview sitting on a borrowed couch in a borrowed blazer, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," she told the camera. "I was just trying to be human." And when they asked her what she felt the moment she lost her job, she didn't sugarcoat it. I was scared. I was tired. I was angry, but not at my boss. I was angry at how small kindness had become, like it was something we had to explain or apologize for. The clip went viral. In a week, she had emails from school teachers, paramedics, war veterans, and single parents across the country. They all said the same thing. Thank you for reminding us. But not everyone was thankful. The backlash came quietly at first. A few online comments. Some criticism from industry blogs. Then a columnist questioned whether Maria had staged the whole thing. She got a job out of it, didn't she? The article read. Hard not to wonder if it was part of a calculated move. Maria read the words twice. Her stomach dropped. It was the first time she understood that when your story grows too big, people try to take it away from you. That week, she drove to a town called Mason Ridge, tiny, rural, forgotten. There was no press there, no buzz. Just a small community center and a roof that needed patching. She met Irene there, a woman in her 60s who had run the food pantry for 20 years. No salary. Just stubborn grace. When Maria offered the grant, Irene stared at her for a moment, then hugged her without asking. No one ever comes here unless it's to leave, Irene whispered. Maria smiled. Well, I'm not here to leave. I'm here to stay a while. They spent the day cleaning shelves and unloading boxes. At one point, Maria noticed a boy, maybe 12, staring at her from the corner, curiosity in his eyes. You the lady from the computer video? He asked. She knelt down. I might be. My mom cried when she watched it. Said it made her feel like she wasn't alone. Maria felt her throat tighten. What's your name? Ezra. Well, Ezra, if I'm ever on the computer again, I'll remember you when I speak. That night, she sat in her motel room, exhausted and alive. She stared at the ceiling fan spinning above her and thought about how fast everything had changed, and how fragile it still was. Meanwhile, back in Columbus, David was fighting a different kind of storm. A senior board member, pressured by sponsors uncomfortable with politicized outreach, called an emergency review of Maria's position and the funding behind her program. David argued, pleaded, presented numbers, video testimonials, even Ezra's handwritten thank you note. But business was business, and kindness didn't always impress quarterly reports. Maria returned from Mason Ridge to find a letter waiting on her desk. Not a termination, yet, but a reassignment, pending internal review. She sat in silence, the envelope still open beside her. So this was it. Again, she wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. But she was tired. She thought of Irene and Ezra, of her mother's now stable health, of the volunteers who'd rebuilt a whole pantry from scratch. Was she really about to lose it all again because someone up the chain found kindness off-brand? That night, she typed. Not an email, not a tweet, a letter, and not to the board, to the people. It began with, Dear strangers who feel like family. If this is the last thing I get to say with this platform, let me say this loud and clear. Kindness is not a trend. It's a survival tool. She posted it at midnight. By morning, it was everywhere. The hashtag kindness is work trended nationally. Maria didn't sleep that night, or the next, but on the third day, David called her into his office. He was smiling. They pulled the reassignment, he said. Unanimous vote. Her chest tightened. What changed? He held up a tablet. On it, hundreds of photos. Food pantries, kids in jackets donated through Langston's winter drive, volunteers building mobile medical vans. They saw you, and then they saw the people you helped. And suddenly, they remembered what we're doing here. She didn't cry, but when she stepped out into the hallway and looked up at the ceiling, her eyes welled anyway. Later that week, Maria returned to the bench outside her old apartment building, the one where David first offered her the job. She sat there alone, watching the streetlight flicker, listening to a dog bark somewhere far off. A little boy walked past, holding his mother's hand. He looked at her and smiled. She smiled back. He didn't know who she was. And that was okay. She didn't need fame. She needed purpose. And she had it now. Even if the world tried to take it again, she knew how to rebuild. The morning after the board reversed its decision, Maria stood on the roof of the Langston Systems building. It wasn't a fancy rooftop. No sleek patio furniture or catered brunches. Just a patch of gravel, a few maintenance ducts, and a wide view of the city stretching out like folded fabric under a gray sky. She closed her eyes and let the wind run across her cheeks. This wasn't triumph. It was clarity. She hadn't won. Not really. The world wasn't fixed. People were still hurting. Bills still stacked up on tables just like hers had. But for the first time in a long time, Maria didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was steering. And that changed everything. In the weeks that followed, Maria rewrote the entire outreach model. Not on a whiteboard, not behind a desk, but in the field. She returned to the same gas stations, motels, and diner counters where stories like hers had played out 1,000 times unnoticed. This time, she asked questions. What do you need? What's no one listening to? What's your kindness cost you? She created something called the First Step Fund, a microgrant program that required no paperwork, no background checks, no red tape. Just a story, a real one, told face-to-face. People helping people. Quietly. Without spectacle. Word traveled fast. And not just among those in need, but among those ready to help. An elderly veteran donated his classic car to a single mom after hearing her on Maria's podcast. A retired nurse offered free care to underinsured seniors once she read Maria's blog post about her mother's medication struggle. One of the towns they visited renamed their community pantry after her. Maria's table, the sign read, painted in warm red with a yellow heart underneath. Maria cried the day they unveiled it, not because her name was on it, but because it meant something. Something lasting. She was no longer just reacting to a broken system. She was building something better. One evening, David found her in the quiet room at the Columbus office. It was a glass-walled space meant for reflection, stacked with books, quiet lighting, and a soft leather couch no one ever sat on. Maria sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by handwritten letters. Dozens of them. From where? He asked. Everywhere, she said softly. People just started sending them. Stories. Thank yous. Requests. Confessions. David knelt down beside her, picked up one. She thought her voice didn't matter, Maria said. Then she saw my video. Now she's organizing winter coats for her neighborhood. David looked at her. Do you realize what you've done? I haven't done anything special, she said. I just showed up. No, Maria. You turned the world's attention toward the people it forgot. She smiled. Then let's not let them forget again. The day she spoke at the annual Langston Summit, the room was filled with suits, senators, and skeptics. Maria stood behind the podium with no script, just a folded piece of paper in her pocket and the kind of resolve that only comes from surviving the fire. I'm not here to inspire you, she began. I'm here to remind you that every policy you debate, every dollar you move, every project you greenlight, it ripples. Down into neighborhoods with broken sidewalks and flickering lights. Down into homes with empty fridges and unpaid heating bills. Down into the lives of people like me. People who aren't asking for miracles. Just mercy. Silence. Then thunderous applause. And not the polite kind. The kind that sticks in your chest. Afterward, a woman from the mayor's office shook Maria's hand and whispered, You just rewrote how we think about outreach. Maria smiled gently. I didn't rewrite it. I just said it out loud. Her mother was doing better, too. The new health coverage gave them stability they'd never known. And the new apartment, small, yes, but bright, had become a sanctuary. Sometimes, in the late hours, her mother would sit in the kitchen, humming old Motown and watching Maria scribble ideas on a notepad. You know, she said once, you used to be so quiet. Maria looked up. Was I? You were always watching. Listening. I just didn't know what you were storing up in that head of yours. Maria chuckled. Turns out, everything. But even growth has shadows. With visibility came pressure. With leadership came responsibility. There were weeks Maria barely slept, balancing fieldwork with national meetings. Some days, the weight of expectations sat on her chest like a stone. You're the kindness girl, one TV host had called her. But Maria knew better. She wasn't a brand. She was a person, one still learning, still healing. And that was okay. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep showing up. On the anniversary of the day she'd lost her job at the gas station, Maria returned to the site. The building had been closed for months, windows dark and dusty. A for sale sign leaned crooked in the lot. She stood there, hands in her coat pockets, watching the wind carry leaves across the gravel. And then she laughed. A deep, shaking laugh. Because the place that had once broken her now felt impossibly small. She walked to pump 3, touched the rusted handle, and whispered, Thank you. Not to the job, but to the moment. The moment she chose compassion over compliance. The moment that cost her everything and gave her even more. That night, she opened her laptop and wrote a letter, not to the public, not for press, but to herself. Dear Maria, you didn't just survive. You transformed. And every scar, every cracked bone, every long shift and heavy breath, it was never wasted. You became a lighthouse. And even if the world forgets again, you'll remember. You'll shine. She hit save and let the silence of the night wrap around her like a promise kept. The rain fell softly that morning, just enough to hush the city without soaking it. A gentle, steady drizzle that made people walk a little slower, turn their collars up, pull hoods tighter. Maria liked mornings like this. She stood on the steps of a newly opened community center on the east side of Cleveland, watching the slow shuffle of people arriving, single mothers, veterans, teenagers, a few grandparents bundled up in thick coats. Every one of them here because they'd heard something was different about this place. They were right. Inside, hot meals were being served without a name required. A closet of donated coats stood open. Take what you need, no questions asked. In the back room, a volunteer was helping someone fill out an application for a job they'd given up on 2 years ago. And at the heart of it all, mounted on the entry wall under a soft overhead light, hung a framed photo. Not of Maria, but of Pump 3. Beneath it, a brass plaque. Kindness starts where no one is looking. Maria ran her fingers along the edge of the frame, then stepped outside and tilted her face toward the sky. The rain kissed her cheeks like a benediction. This was her 10th site this year. 10 communities rebuilt, 10 roots planted, and more still to come. Later that day, Maria sat in front of a high school auditorium packed to the edges with students and teachers. She wasn't here for a keynote. She was here to listen. The school had implemented the First Step Circle, a weekly meeting started by 2 seniors who had seen one of Maria's early outreach videos and decided they didn't need to wait until they were grown to make change. They called it a kindness movement. But it was more than that. It was confessions. It was stories. It was safety. Kids who never spoke in class now stood at the mic and shared things that cracked the air wide open. Homelessness, loss, hope, healing. Maria sat in the front row with tears drying on her cheeks. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The movement had outgrown her voice. And that was the point. That evening, as she rode the train back to Columbus, Maria scrolled through her messages. A familiar name popped up. David Langston. Need a favor. One last ride out with me. Tomorrow. She smiled. Where to? Back to where it began. They drove together in silence the next morning. No suits. No assistants. Just 2 old allies in jeans and jackets, wind in their hair, ghost in the rearview. When they pulled into the empty lot that once housed Dawson's Gas and Go, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear now, soft, open, forgiving. The building had been demolished, the gravel flattened. A new sign stood where the pumps used to be. Langston Thompson Outreach Center, breaking ground spring 2025. Maria's breath caught. She turned to David, stunned. This is where we start again, he said simply. Not me, she said. Us. He nodded, his voice low. You changed how I see everything, Maria. I was building systems. You taught me how to build stories. You made the mission human. She looked out over the lot. She could already see it. The red door, the warm lights, the hand-painted mural wrapping the side wall with faces from towns like hers. She could see the kids who'd come in after school for shelter. The mother who'd sit in the corner making calls with free Wi-Fi. The man who'd walk in with nothing but be met with warmth, not suspicion. She could see hope. Not flashy, not loud, but honest, earned, real. Months later, Maria sat in her office overlooking the finished outreach center. Her mother, now in remission, was knitting in the corner. A new generation of volunteers bustled through the hallway with clipboards and open hearts. Maria was writing again, letters, essays, speeches she'd deliver in town halls and on podcasts. But more often than not, she just told stories. Stories of the woman who gave her last $5 to a stranger. Stories of the kid who organized a coat drive in memory of his late brother. Stories of quiet revolutions that started with a whisper instead of a roar. One day, she found a message tucked under her office door. It was written in pencil, on lined paper, folded 4 times that I came here thinking no one would see me. You did. Now I want to help others be seen too. Thank you for making it okay to ask for help. I'm going to volunteer next week. My name is Jamie. I'm 17. Maria held the note to her heart, tears falling silently down her cheeks. That was the moment she knew. She hadn't just stepped into her power. She'd passed it on. Years from now, people would study the kindness shift, as they called it, the slow, quiet movement that changed how the country treated its forgotten. They would cite statistics, reference policy changes, show graphs of increased housing access and reduced dropout rates in areas touched by the Langston-Thompson model. But none of those documents would capture the full truth. That it started with a woman who had nothing to give but a kind word and $20 of gas. That she lost everything in a single day and chose to stay kind anyway. That she turned a moment of compassion into a movement of restoration. Maria never asked to be remembered. But kindness has a memory all its own. And wherever someone chooses grace over judgment, wherever someone says, "Let me help," without expecting praise, wherever someone sees a stranger not as a burden but as a mirror, there she will be. Not in statues, not in textbooks, but in the quiet revolution of hearts choosing hope again and again. And that never ends.